Welcome to UCLA Anderson's Impact Week 2023. Thank you so much to BioscienceLA for hosting us for this amazing event. I'm Julia Schweitzer. I am a second-year MBA at UCLA Anderson and founder of Unfazed Foods. And as a CPG food founder, I am super excited for this panel with these amazing panelists. They are going to be talking about food tech and sustainability, building circular food systems. They're going to be diving into some innovative ways to be thinking about sustainability in food and how to support a circular food system. And I personally can account for the fact that you're going to learn a ton today because I've been working with Kaitlin of Pulp Pantry, and she helped to bring together this group of people who I know she holds in super high regard as well. So be prepared to learn a lot today. And with that, I will pass it to Joy Nemerson of the Upcycled Food Association to moderate and introduce our panelists. So thank you all.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having us. And happy Earth Month, happy Earth Day, happy
Stop Food Waste Day today.
That's today. So we're all celebrating and we're so happy to be with you. So I'll start. I'm Joy and I came all the way up or down or whichever way from San Diego. And I'm so excited to be here to talk about upcycled food. I work for the Upcycled Food Association and I get to share the message of all of our incredible members that are creating upcycled ingredients and products out of things that would ordinarily not see the light of day. So let's go down the line. Give us an intro. Lara, why don't you start?
So my name is Lara and I came all the way from Santa Monica, not London, obviously, all the way from Santa Monica here today. I am the Chief Innovation and Science Officer for Upcycled Foods, Inc., which is a member of the Upcycled Foods Association and has been, Dan, the CEO, is actually a founding member of the association. And we are an ingredient platform. So we focus at the very beginning of a food system life cycle and really work with manufacturers to utilize their food waste and unlock hidden treasure that is otherwise in food waste. And prior to this role, because I'm only on day 8, I've spent the last 20 years working in CPG, from candles to fine fragrance to personal care to beer, beverages and snacks and all the other things. So if anybody wants to talk to me about CPG afterwards, I'm more than happy to do that.
And I'm Kaitlin, founder of Pulp Pantry, which is a local brand here. We make a line of veggie chips from upcycled produce. So we're really focused on value-added processing in food manufacturers who have byproducts such as the peels, the stems, the pulp from their food manufacturing and leveraging those ingredients to create new value-added snacks and pantry staples for evolving consumers who care a lot about sustainability and nutrition. And I also have had the pleasure of being a part of the Upcycled Food Association and being Upcycled certified. So we'll obviously get into a lot of that, and I'll pass it off to Erik.
Thank you. My name's Erik Haug. I'm the founder of CoCreative. We have a social innovation and sustainability consulting firm based here in LA, focused on basic human needs, and we're very deep on food and water. We launched our Cultivate LA campaign over a year ago, focused on food security and sustainability across LA County. So we've brought together over 50 cross-sector partners around different solutions and activations to solve for food sustainability here in LA. And yeah, looking forward to talking about some of the great projects we have going on, and just an honor to be here alongside these amazing leaders who are doing so much work here locally and nationally, internationally, frankly. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, are you guys excited? Okay. Great. Okay, so we're going to start by zooming out a lot, and we're just going to say, what is the circular economy and how does food fit into it? And why don't we start with you, Erik?
So I really look at circularity as coming into harmony with nature. So, right now there's many different pieces of our value chain and our lifestyle that creates friction with nature. And so how do we look at ways to close loops, keep things out of the environment and back into our value chain, into our economy? So a broad definition I'll start with, but at the end of the day, how are we impacting the environment and how are we maximizing the resources that we have and creating more efficiencies versus friction and waste. It's my high-level recap of it.
I like that. My favorite analogy is probably when we talk about the linear economy, take, make, waste. And I think what so many of us working in this like circular economy and building kind of value added ways to look at byproducts or things that were overlooked and typically discarded. When we think about waste as consumers, like none of us really know where the end materials that we consume and throw in the trash go. And so for us, it's really looking at, there are places where we can unlock value and really, specifically in our case, leverage what was typically, it was waste, it was trash for them, it was a cost center, and look at really maximizing and elevating those resources to their best and highest use. So a lot of what we talk about too, being kind of what is the use hierarchy, especially when you look at the EPA, where it's feeding humans, then feeding animals, then feeding our soils, and as a very last resort, sending things to the landfill, of course. So really closing the loop to me is also elevating all of these materials that would typically be lost through our supply chain to their best and highest use. And that's what we're seeking to do here.
I think circular economy in a food system, I think will naturally have to become the way we design food in the future. I think my wish, having moved from big corporations and now working for a startup that's in the upcycled food space, I really believe fervently that the future of food system design will include everything that we eat, will include a proportion of upcycled ingredients, because I think it's the only way. I don't know whether you have children, but for those of us, I don't have children, but if those of us care about how we leave the planet and how we leave it for Generation Alpha, so people who are in school now, then I think it's incumbent on any of us working in a food system to think about circular economy. And that for me means going back to how the original ingredients and the crops are grown, because we, over years and years and years, have destroyed, through what we thought at the time, by the way, we didn't know that we were making these mistakes, right? Have grown these things in ways which have destroyed the land. And also really important for me as a scientist, actually what we're seeing over time is that crops that we've taken for granted, like wheat and corn and so on, are decreasing in nutrient density. So not only are we destroying the soil in which these crops that we need in our diet are becoming hostile environments for things to grow, but actually the food that we're then developing doesn't have the same amount of nutrients that it did 10, 15, 20 years ago. So the circular economy for me is actually essentially designing food systems to use all the materials and resources that would otherwise be wasted first before you're using virgin materials, in order to protect the virgin materials and allow the virgin materials to be nurtured, allow the soil to regenerate, and allow all of those to reduce the use of water and so on. And I can say that, because I've been in product design for a long time, I can say that to start with a circular system and to start with using resources that would otherwise be wasted isn't natural for people who are working in food system design right now.
So it's a shift that we need.
Yes, it's a massive shift, yeah.
Exactly. Okay, well, great. So that's where we've started. Now let's talk about where we're going and how we're going there. So as you all know, I work for the Upcycled Food Association, which is a relatively new association, but upcycling is not a new concept. If you've ever cooked, you've probably upcycled, right? If you've ever saved your veggie scraps or saved the bones of your chicken, you put it in your freezer, you saved it for broth, that's upcycling. And we all do that all the time because it makes sense and it saves money, right? So that's sort of the basic of what upcycling is. So the UFA, Upcycled Food Association, was founded by all of these incredible entrepreneurs that said, we want to do this, we want to make it easier for other people to do this. Where do we begin? So where they began was defining what upcycled food means. What is it? Where can we put this definition so everyone can read it and understand, or hope to understand? So upcycled food means that you are taking something that ordinarily would not have gone to human consumption, and you are using it for that to make a positive environmental impact. So that's what upcycled food is. the way that I like to describe upcycled food is with my 3 U's. Okay, we have now I forget all of them. Just kidding. No. We have
Unwanted, unseen.
we have unseen. So these are things that consumers don't even know about. So things like cacao fruit, sometimes coffee fruit. You don't
Spent
even
grain.
Well, yeah. I put it in a different bucket, but yeah, sometimes, things that are at the beginning of the food chain that you don't necessarily even see because they just get discarded right away. So that's unseen. Then we have unwanted. So you've probably heard of something called imperfect produce or misfits market, right? That really invokes the idea of those like, little carrots hugging, or those ugly bananas, those apples with the big bumps on the side. So those are the ugly things that unfortunately a lot of people don't want to put out on the grocery store, but are still edible, are still nutritious, are still delicious. So those are sort of the unwanted things. And then we have untapped, which is one of my favorite ones. And it's really where there's a lot of innovation. So it's all those byproducts like spent grain, like pulp, that are, again, typically just discarded, but during the process they're created. So we're sort of creating waste, and then they're just going, away. We don't necessarily know where they're going, but they go away. So those are my 3 U's. So hopefully that helps you paint a picture of what upcycled food is. So now that I've talked, and that's the most I'll talk, let's have Kaitlin tell us about Pulp Pantry and really where this idea came from and how it all began.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the idea, like when I started Pulp Pantry, I don't even think upcycled was really in the lexicon for our food industry. And actually what's so funny is, well, I'll get into that. But for me, it was really actually starting in, I was teaching at a Title I elementary school in West Adams. So I went to USC, sorry. And I was, my senior year of college, actually, part of the class was we had to get an internship at a local nonprofit. And I had already been environmental science background. So living a very zero waste, low waste, intentional kind of lifestyle was already something I was doing day to day in light of just really my own footprint as a consumer. But the tie-in for me was actually working at this urban elementary school garden and really actually seeing the issues of healthy food access and distribution in Los Angeles. And, in a place where we live only 200 miles away from some of the farms growing all of the most of the produce for the rest of the country, the lettuce and everything. It was so shocking to me that in our community in West Adams, there were no grocery stores within miles of these schools. And so because of that, kids were coming into the garden for the first time ever, seeing a fresh carrot or fresh tomato, and teaching kids how to really grow vegetables from seed to then actually cooking and consuming them. And it made me realize like how much we really can't take these resources for granted. And I think, fast forward to, I was at a friend's house. This is about the same semester. So all happening kind of in this last year of college. And I was at a friend's house and saw her juice a carrot. And I was from Chicago, so it was a shock to me to come to LA and be like, oh my gosh, there's a juicery on every corner. What is going on? But the funny thing about the juice industry is kind of like what you talked about, unseen. As a consumer, when you're looking at a juice bar or you're buying a bottle of juice, you don't actually see what the waste is or what the production or manufacturing process is. And this is actually something that I think we can extrapolate to really any food manufacturing process. Like most of us as consumers have no idea how the food is ending up in the grocery store. And so it was such a shock to me to see the amount of waste that was really produced from this very simple, like watching a friend juice a carrot. And when I looked at her and she looked at me and all my friends knew I was like a crazy zero waste person. She's like, I have no idea what to do with this. I usually throw it away. And so for me, that started really the spiral of, as someone who already was really passionate about this, just calling up 10 juiceries in my area being like, what do you guys do with the pulp? And I think from that exploration process, really realizing it was an untapped opportunity that most of these juiceries and most of these then extrapolating to larger national juice brands and then also food manufacturers, they view it as a cost center. For them, it's actually like a burden to figure out how to dispose of it. And for most juiceries in LA, they were sending it to the landfill because we didn't have farmers or compost services or people that would come pick it up and do something more sustainable with it. So that was really kind of the spark for me. And I guess the funny story that I tie it back to is actually I was at a grocery store going to what was right when I graduated. I went to this program that was like a food MBA, it was not an MBA because it was literally like a week-long food camp. But I went to this like food MBA through the Culinary Arts Institute or something like that. I think it's CIA. So CIA, there's some wording that's wrong
CIA
there.
does an MBA in food. Wouldn't think they'd have the time.
You never know. But I actually saw on the shelf this brand called Regrained, and I was in the Bay Area, and I was in LA, of course, and I was like, there's a brand that's doing exactly what I want to do, which is actually now the company that Lara works for. So it comes full circle, like coming up in the same time, having the Upcycled Food Association created. I just feel like there are so many places. We only look at fresh produce for me and really the vegetable-based ingredients and the waste there, but there's so many verticals, like Joy mentioned, that we can tap into and where there's value to be uncovered.
Okay, so you've heard Kaitlin's story. Lara works at what was Regrained, is now Upcycled Foods, which is an ingredient supplier, which is an incredible way to really make it that much easier for other companies to make upcycled food.
So Dan, the CEO, started his journey. His journey starts in a frat house at UCLA. He told me to talk smack to you, by the way, because UCLA and USC are rivals. I understand. So he was a home brewer. He was a beer maker, and he realized, and there's a funny thing to this story as well, because my life has come full circle, by the way, as well. So he was a home brewer at college, and he was in his frat house, and he's making beer, and he realizes that there's all this grain left over from the beer making process. So once you've got your grain, and you've got your yeast, and you've got your hops, and you add the water, and you boil it for a bit, then you take the liquid and you leave all the grain behind, right? And as a scientist, you're like, oh my God, there's all this nutrition left in here, all these people that you can feed with this. And he obviously thought the same years ago. And he actually did an entrepreneurship program at the Anderson School of Management. So it was pre-MBA. And he nurtured this idea through this entrepreneurship program, and then did his MBA, and the company that I now work for has come out of that. I met Dan when I worked for a beer company. And I worked for a beer company, a very big beer company, and we had a waste to earth program, because we still have a bajillion tons. That's an official scientific term, by the way. It's north of a billion, a bajillion tons of spent grain, and we didn't know what to do with it. And what happens currently, by the way, in all beer companies, is that the spent grain gets dried on site, and it usually goes to animal feed, and anything that doesn't go to animal feed gets wasted and goes to landfill. And Dan had set up this company, and actually we had come to our company to work together on what we called the Waste to Earth program. The two companies still work together, actually, but obviously since then I've had two jobs, and so I've come now to this come back to work on the other side, actually, because indeed I am my own personal circular economy. And because I actually believe that there is so much work to do at the manufacturing end, because at the moment the ingredient platform focuses on spent grain, because there is really a bajillion tons of it. And honestly, did you know that only 10% of Americans get their recommended daily allowance of fiber in their diet? So that means there are 90% of Americans who are missing out on the one superpower food that they need in order to nurture their gut health and get overall well-being. Fiber is like this superpower of ingredient that supports gut health, helps regulate blood cholesterol, helps regulate blood sugar, and all of these different things. And yet, as Americans, they're not getting enough of it in their diet naturally. So I'm making it my personal mission to make more people eat more fiber. But in spent grain is a high concentration of fiber and protein. So we're just leaving all this nutrition to give to pigs, which is not a bad thing, but I'd like to see it also go back into the human food system. So it's spent grain today, but it could be, oats tomorrow, rice, whatever waste stream. It could be any of those things.
Great. Okay, so Kaitlin, you mentioned that upcycling is sort of a burden. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the logistics of how you go about actually collecting the material that you used.
You walk around with a bucket and collect pulp outside the juicery.
Well, it started with going to Target to get a couple bins that were definitely not food safe.
See,
and
wasn't
literally
wrong.
that was that. But I think, what's been really interesting is actually as this has grown, and I always talk about right sizing your partnerships in a way in kind of this space, because I think so many of the emerging brands, the biggest challenge is really finding larger organizations that have a large volume of output that are willing to kind of partner on what might be a very small scale for them. So you talked about a bajillion pounds, but at least
the official scientific term, yes.
but at least, you know, there was an entrepreneur or a program that was created internally that was really like, you know, we care about where these products are going. We don't want to see them go to waste. We know there's valuable nutrition that could go back into our food system, so we're going to do something about it. And I think similarly, when we've really chosen our partners, you know, what we really look for is usually there is like a sustainability task force. For example, one of our partners is Evolution Fresh, and they're a true certified supplier. So they actually have a zero waste facility, and that's really something of importance to them. So it is hard because I think there are some, you know, there's so much opportunity in this space, but you also have to find the entrepreneurs and the people that are willing within those partner organizations. It's a collaborative approach, right? Like we're not making the juice and supplying the pulp. We have to work with our partners to really rely on them for what is a food safe ingredient that we can now use in our products. And so, you know, one of the biggest challenges and barriers for us was really finding those partners that are truly aligned with kind of the direction and the vision for this partnership and where it can go. And, you know, that meant really going into the facilities and working with their team that's on the day-to-day operations, not just like the VP of sustainability, right? Because they're not actually in the day-to-day executing and collecting this material for us. So going into these facilities and really from the ground up saying, okay, what is the process that you're going through right now? And where are the kind of key points of collection where we can actually, you know, create, maybe it's a new process that's easily implementable. And so for us, you know, this used to be on a conveyor going just straight into a dump truck. So for us, sometimes it literally looks like reversing the lines when we're running a collection and, you know, dedicating labor and staff to actually really collecting that material as well. So it has required work. And I think the way that we try to compensate at least for that is, you know, we've had some partnerships where we're getting the material for free. And I think that's another thing that's so beautiful about the upcycled food industry is, you know, I would buy a pound of kale puree at $1.30 a pound. And now I'm paying very much less than that. So I think, you know, there's that kind of economic value as well. But I would say, you know, paying for the labor or subsidizing the labor, whatever we can do to really make this something where there's true buy-in from the partner organization and a win-win for everyone involved. So it takes a little designing and thinking, and but finding good partners is really the key, given that it is so collaborative.
I think the byproduct of that, and also of our business, is that if you're really focused on managing your costs and also being mindful of trying to lead a purpose-driven business, I mean a truly purpose-driven business, actually by default, we've gone to local sourcing. And we've gone to and I have worked for global businesses. And so now I'm working at a business where I'm looking at the fact that spent grain has to be dried almost immediately after the beer making process. And then, you know, it doesn't make sense to then transport it, you know, hundreds of miles, right? So if you want to do that, if you want to make that spent grain flour, you have to do it in the location where the beer is being made. For example, similarly to Kaitlin's brand, right? She's working with local juiceries and presseries. From a logistics point of view, it's hard to globalize that and commercialize that and then not lose your carbon footprint and not impact other parts of the life cycle. And so I think generally speaking, whilst I think that including upcycled ingredients in food systems is going to become part of the future, I'm also a firm believer that we're going to get back to more local sourcing and seasonality, because we've forgotten that celery is a summer vegetable and not a winter vegetable, for example, and things like that. You know, I didn't grow up in the UK eating celery in December, for example. So I think we will naturally have to get back to that if we want to utilize the Earth's resources in the right way.
Yeah, so Lara really wanted me to make sure that we talked about the challenges. So we touched on them a little bit, but I want to just let everyone know that there are challenges. So maybe we, you know, again, just talk about what are the challenges of working in this space and sort of how you've overcome that.
Well, I think there's a couple of things, right? Kaitlin will tell you about this in more detail as well, I'm sure. But how do you make your business profitable? I think it is a big challenge. And where I come from CPG background. I think there's two challenges. One, Upcycled is relatively new in our lexicon and still is not in your average consumer lexicon. And when you talk about upcycled food in particular, they still associate it with waste. And you have some experience of this, having launched Pulp chips in Target and had some sort of real-time feedback, but it's still waste. And so that is a challenge for your average consumer to get over, especially, by the way, in a 3-second shopping decision. And I know that from my former life that it is really 3 seconds that a shopper makes that choice at shelf. I think the second thing is price point. I know that there is a lot of research in the sustainability area that says that 57% of shoppers want to make sustainable choices when they're in the supermarket. And I think that's 57% of people who are filling out a questionnaire at a desk in home. But when I'm going to the supermarket and I have a certain budget that I have to spend and can only afford X, Y, and Z in order to feed my family, I think this sustainable food choice is much, much lower down the hierarchy. And it is, and I'm sure you'll back me up on this, but at the moment, anything that is in the sustainable world, including Upcycled, is at a premium, right? So anything, and that's, I would say, in all categories, right? Not just the ingredient, but also, snacks, beverages, whatever it is. And so our challenge collectively in all the association is to continue to work to make the things that we do accessible. So not just accessible to the people who can afford it, but to everybody. Because if I believe that actually there's this unearthed treasure in spent grain, which is fiber, and it's a superfood, it's my duty to make sure that I'm making the fiber available to everybody, not just the people who can afford it. So that continues, those two things continue to be the biggest challenges that I foresee for our movement, but I'm here to unlock that, right? I'm here to look at different ways to do that.
Oh, well, super well said. I think one insight, though, with the upcycled food movement is the density of nutrition and even the superfood characteristics within a lot of the food. So, for example, potato skins, carrots, citrus skin, they have tons of value in there, and obviously everything outlined. So if we can start to shift perceptions towards this is not waste, you're not buying a worse product. You're actually getting superfoods and you're contributing to the environment, and start to tell that story in a powerful way, which is what you all are doing, frankly. That's really powerful, and I think has a lot of promise.
We have to make the food taste good, though, right? Yeah. Because I recently talked to all the food service directors that make food for our school children across the whole of America, right? So 750 food service directors. And I'm not going to lie, I went in there with a very certain point of view, which got completely knocked. I got completely sort of beaten up by them, rightly, because I shouldn't have gone in with assumptions. Because one, they're operating on a very strict budget, and they only have budget, as it turns out, to really give school children one meal, but they're often giving them 3, because a lot of the school children are coming there with not having had breakfast, and they have to keep them for after school club and what have you. And then I realized that Domino's makes a special pizza slice for schools, and I'm like completely appalled by this. Like, why is there pizza in school? And it's because actually the crust is one of the only ways that they get fiber into their diet, and the tomato and the onion counts as vegetables. So I guess there's a much broader and bigger topic, which is about taste and taste preference. And when you talk to the food service directors, you say, really need to get more fiber and protein, and they get it, right? They get it, but they're saying, but my biggest concern is that I just need to make sure the children are fed, because a lot of them are coming to me without food. And so they're like, I'm going to give them the chocolate milk because that's the only way they get calcium and vitamin D and so on. And I'm like, okay. So I think, but generally in amongst consumers, we can talk till the cows come about putting more fiber and protein and upcycling food and potato skins and carrot. We can, of course, we're all committed to that. But if it doesn't taste very good, nobody's going to buy it. And we have to start educating our children at a younger age to expand their palate as well and let them experiment more. So anyway.
I think just, one thing on the challenges piece that you both mentioned of this kind of concept of waste. I think one thing that we've learned too is putting the upcycled messaging front and center on the packaging. I mean, we have such a big educational barrier that we have to kind of jump over. We did a study with Target before we launched the chips in their stores, and we had upcycled front and center on the packaging. And the number one negative comment we got back from these are consumers that kind of skew towards healthy products within Target. But number one comment we got back was, "You upcycled? You're feeding me recycled." Like recycled products. And then it was also, why is it more expensive? If you're feeding me waste, why is this more expensive? And so it is really interesting, just because I think we do have a lot of barriers to break through in terms of just educating people about, first of all, this is not waste. So I think just the visual, for consumers to see behind the scenes of really where are these materials coming from. It's not, it's not probably what we have all in the back of our heads or the back of our minds. And then on the other side of it too, understanding really, I guess, the cost and complexity of kind of working with upcycled supply chains. And I feel like there's, the accessibility piece is such a hard topic to swallow for me personally, because, we are selling a product at a premium, and that's because of wanting to be able to be a profitable, sustainable business in a way. And so, we have to make sure we have our margin, and we have to make sure we can sustain growth and continue to invest in growth. But I think accessibility, sometimes it does feel like it's so far on the horizon in terms of how do we make these products more accessible from a cost perspective. But I also feel like that's where, at least for me personally, it's looking to partner with organizations where, we really can potentially build an in-kind sponsorship or something like that. But again, it is such a challenge. And I know that's a piece that you really look to focus on as well.
But also you have to, I think in terms of partnerships and collaboration, it comes down to the way in which we make our food. And the more people that are upcycling ingredients and or materials in order to put them back into the food system, the processing technology in order to do that will become cheaper, and by default then the outcoming ingredient and or product will also be more accessible. At the moment we're just at the very beginning of this movement, although Dan has been at this for a while, has been plugging away at this for a while, but I think we now need more people to join and join the sort of R&D product development innovation end in order to share the investment. It needs more investment. It needs more technology in order to be able to do that efficiently, in order to provide more accessible food and nutrition to people.
And we've run into that, I think, just on the supplier side, actually building these supply chains. Obviously, there's cost involved with how we're collecting the logistics of that material, but then actually going into the manufacturing phase. One of the big challenges that I was faced with before launching the veggie chips was we talked to 50 manufacturers. We work with a co-packer, so they are a chip facility, and basically they have the equipment and they provide all the materials and the labor and everything to produce this end product. But they're used to using flour-based inputs, and you add the water, you add the oil, and that's how we make these products. And so then we came in and we were like, well, we want to rework this and we want to incorporate fresh vegetables. And those things don't necessarily go hand in hand with the way that their manufacturing is set up. So that's been really a challenge to overcome. And even thinking, I think, going back to even sometimes I talk to the manufacturer who makes the tortilla chip line, and I literally just say, hey, here are the issues we're running into given the vegetable fiber and the materials we're working with. For them, they're like, I have never heard of anyone doing this before. But, there are always solutions to work through. And so it is kind of like one of those things where you think pie in the sky, could I rework a line so that it fits my needs? And at the end of the day, to be truly scalable to the extent of a corn-based tortilla chip, we would need to do that. We would need to invest in the manufacturing capabilities to do that. And I think it's a compromise where we are right now, just to say, we're going to make the most of what we got. But I think there are tons of ways that just technology and kind of the manufacturing equipment and processes could really be reworked to better leverage upcycled inputs.
Do you think we covered that enough?
Yeah, that was great, guys. Okay, we are coming to the end, but I want to touch on something that both of you brought up, which is staying local and then also partnerships. So, Erik, I'd love for you to share with us about some of the projects you're working on in LA that hopefully we can all be involved in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say first of all, there is so much happening in LA around the food security and food sustainability movement. And we keep meeting new leaders and teams, discovering new initiatives every week. So it's an amazing ecosystem. I think we are so set up to drive major innovations here in LA, given our proximity to food supply and agriculture and the depth of need, the depth of food insecurity and the clarity around the problem that really emerged and became very apparent during the pandemic. So the stakeholder alignment is here. It's about, I think, getting more data, getting more partnerships, building more momentum, but we absolutely can do something really powerful here in Los Angeles. And some of the projects, so just, if you're interested in learning more about what's happening, LA County Food Equity Roundtable, amazing work happening, over 200 entities in that ecosystem and various initiatives. LA Food Policy Council, amazing work, amazing research. And then I would also, if you look at what's happening with addressing our unhoused community and Angelina's experiencing homelessness, the increase in budgets and the focus on that, food is very intersectional in terms of justice and this challenge, and there is a big part of the root cause of that problem around food if you really start to look at it. And so there's a lot of amazing organizations like LA Mission and Midnight Mission on Skid Row and just different groups, food banks, food rescue teams, distros happening. And so if you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out some of these orgs that might be in your neighborhood. Volunteer at a food distro. Within Cultivate LA, you can see some of our different events that we're promoting. We're doing stuff with West LA VA and serving our military community. We do stuff at Skid Row. We're doing a whole takeover of the Santa Monica Farmers Market on this Sunday, actually, where we're creating a digital physical scavenger hunt with City of Santa Monica, LA Economic Development, and really supporting local farmers and small food businesses and incentivizing them with our partners at Values Co. to gain different rewards and really just make it more fun to engage in the local food system and really reach Gen Z, Gen Alpha in this way too. So yeah, if you're interested in coming out to the Santa Monica Farmers Market, we're going to have a whole pop-up, and it's International Jazz Day as well. So it should be a fun fact, really good day. So a lot of different initiatives to plug into, but again, I would just say we're really well positioned here. There's a lot of great leaders in LA, and it's just looking for more involvement, more entrepreneurs, more capital, more talent to work on this problem.
Great. So before we go into Q&A, I just want to ask one more question to our panel. So yesterday we all spoke and we were asked to think of something that, a trend or an organization or maybe a person that made us feel really inspired about the future and gave us some hope. So I ask you to...
Oh, I forgot about that bit.
Oh, yeah.
I obviously wasn't paying attention in that bit part of the briefing. Go to Kaitlin. I'll think of something in a minute.
I also forgot, so I need
Okay, I'll
cut that.
Were you the only person that did the homework?
So,
Erik, you goody two-shoes.
I'm so inspired. I mean, all the time inspired. But so we actually just had the opportunity to visit with Jane Goodall, who was speaking at the Beehive with our partners at Solar Impact. And she's just so inspiring. And I think one of the things I learned and I've held for many years from Jane's philosophy and her leadership is really around holding hope and compassion And the way she handled the oil and gas industry in Africa, and where many activists were polarizing the conversation, she sat down with the leadership and said, all right, these pipelines are happening. How can we mitigate their impact to the ecosystem and to the animals? And so, understanding where we're at, not polarizing topics, going and being open to working with big corporates that might seem, evil or doing bad things or having certain histories. Not to say that we don't need to be vigilant and have certain boundaries and value systems, but I think being open, being compassionate, meeting with different communities is really important. I think Jane embodies that, and we could use a lot more of that in the world.
I thought of mine. Well, I'm just going to go back to the beginning days because I think, what was really a catalyst for me was working at the LA Kitchen, which was a nonprofit social enterprise that was in Lincoln Heights, no longer, but Robert Egger was the founder. He started DC Central Kitchens, and just, I think going back to this conversation on intersectionality and something that I think just comes up in my work day to day too, and thinking, how do we really build mission front and center in a purpose-driven but also profit-driven business. And what Robert Egger was doing that was so interesting was he was taking people out of LA County jails and really fighting recidivism by giving people culinary job training and then placing them in LA County restaurants, or we would hire them internally for developing some CPG product lines and whatnot. And I feel like it just goes back to doing this work in the upcycled food movement, and kind of this conversation that keeps coming back to accessibility is always having kind of an eye towards, yes, of course, mission is built into these business models, given that we are upcycling, we're fighting food waste to fight climate change. I think for all of us, that's really the motivation. But there's other pieces and aspects that we also have to think about when it comes to just, again, who are these nutritious food resources that we're putting back into the food system really serving, and who are we seeking to serve? So
okay, I'm going to go off brief slightly, but that's probably not unexpected given that you know me. So on Sunday, Kaitlin and I were at a book event in Santa Monica, and who's the author's name? Diana Kapp, and she's written a book called Girls That Green. And I would thoroughly recommend that everybody find a copy and read a copy, because there isn't just one woman in there that's changing the face of the way we do business, but there are several women. And I think what struck me about the women that she highlighted in the book was they didn't necessarily come from the business that they are now running, but they spotted something that bothered them. One of the things that struck me was the woman who was basically in a New York apartment washing her baby's bottles, and she was washing the bottles, and then she said, but actually I'm washing these bottles and there's microplastic in this water now, so I'm not doing the best for my child. So then she basically went on LinkedIn and started contacting all these people that she had no affiliation with, but sort of cold emailed them and said, I'm really bothered by this, I want to do something different. And she and through just basically chutzpah developed this tablet that treats the water before it then cleans your baby's bottle. So, and she has developed and run a business out of it. So I didn't choose one person, chose a book just to be different.
The book is Girls Who Green the World.
Green the World.
And if you have kids, especially, or teens, it's really geared towards, I mean, anyone can read it, but it is geared towards kids and teens, and especially empowering girls to feel like they can have a career, because there's so much climate anxiety.
By the way, I'm feeling quite proud that there are 3 women on this panel today. So well done, UCLA.
Well done.
No, not discounting the one man, you're lovely, really. But women do really run the world. And this book also talks about how it's really women that are changing the face of the way we do business, purpose-led business.
Does this work? I think so. Okay. Well, great. Well, you've heard from us, and now we want to hear from you. So raise your hand, and we'll get you a mic.
Hi, thank you for that. That was awesome. Do you know of any CPG, food and bev companies who are investing in upcycling themselves within their supply chain or doing within their manufacturing facilities?
I just come from one. So my previous job, by the way, feel free to find me on LinkedIn and link with me on LinkedIn. I'm all for getting more connections. So I used to work for Dole, and our biggest waste stream, so day 8, so I worked for Dole like 10 days ago, basically. Our biggest waste stream is bananas. And not because the bananas themselves are bad necessarily, but because of a fungus that afflicts bananas. It means that they develop these black spots. And if they develop black spots, then they're automatically rejected from a quality perspective, because by the time they get to the supermarket will send them back. So we, every year, we have tons of waste bananas, which are this amazing source of nutrition, by the way, especially because we grow the bananas in the Philippines, especially in third world countries, obviously. And so we got all these bananas and we have no idea what to do with them. And we've got banana puree and putting banana puree in products and so on. So in the end, we set up a separate business called Dole Specialty Ingredients, which essentially takes all our waste material and creates upcycled ingredients from it. So now Dole has a green banana powder, and it also has a pineapple powder from waste pineapple, because we also have lots of pineapples, as I'm sure you all know. And we have waste papaya, so we have a papaya seed oil. And we didn't stop there. We looked at all parts of the fruit. So the pineapple leaves are actually sold to Ananas Anam, which is a textile company based out of the UK, and they create a vegan, it's called Piñatex, piña being the Spanish word for pineapple, because the founder is Spanish. She created Piñatex, which has now been used by Nike and Adidas and Zara and so on. So the Dole Specialty Ingredients arm is actually doing pretty well. And just as an FYI, banana powder is full of nutrition. Green banana powder has a natural, if anybody wants to know, has a natural prebiotic. It's full of resistant starch. So it's really, really good for overall wellness, good for gut health. And when the banana goes from being green to yellow, obviously the starch then gets converted to sugar. So it's tasty. It's got lots of other micronutrients in it, but it's lost that resistant starch. So yeah, Dole made a separate business.
Yeah, and if you go to the Upcycled Food Association website, you can see all of our members. We have a lot of larger companies that are doing it and small companies as well.
I think Dole is the only one that's actually making a profit from it, though. Big business.
Evergreen?
Oh, and Evergreen, yes. ABI. ABI's got Evergreen, yeah.
A couple others, yeah.
I had a question about, this is to Erik and then also to all the panelists who are really working on upcycling. The sort of, in some of the research I've done looking at taking produce usually from farms or distribution centers, oftentimes a lot of that might be going to these food banks, right? But I'm curious to upcycler founders and folks who are working in the space, how you think about potentially some of the produce that would otherwise go to food banks. Is there any concern that you're diverting it from that, and how to take a balance? But I'd be curious to hear kind of from potentially both sides on that.
I think it's a great question, and there's some amazing technology startups and companies that are really building out more of the real-time data across the value chain. So we work with Copia, for example. They're doing some amazing work. Full Harvest does work at the ag farm level, and so I think the more data we can get, the better sensing technology around expiration, ripeness, and just making these value chains as dynamic as possible so that they get to the right place. A lot of food banks are food rescue partners and nonprofits like UCLA. They're just doing amazing work, and the more I think tools we can give them to know what they're getting exactly and where they can take it, and solving that piece so that it can turn into like RTE, ready to eat meals, or just figuring out these many pieces of the value chain if it is going to be going to food donation, or if it's not a good fit and can be converted into an ingredient. I think there's a lot happening there, but also a lot of problems to be solved. I'd love to open that to the rest of the group, how they think about donation, maybe could be ready to eat versus getting it into a manufactured state.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge. Like, I remember reading an article about imperfect and misfits, and that was exactly the kind of point that folks brought up but the fact of the matter is, I think there's just so much to go around. And, we couldn't possibly capture, I think, all of the kind of value that's lost just through food donations alone. But I will say that, that's where, at least for us, focusing on the food manufacturing byproducts and places where that food wouldn't normally go to human consumption, that's definitely where I think, like, for me personally, we can make the biggest impact in kind of that, I would say, not necessarily like farm level post-harvest losses, but really looking at value-added manufacturers, what's coming out of those facilities, and kind of leveraging those byproducts that are overlooked. But Joy, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts too.
We need it all, though, don't we? Essentially,
we need it all. Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question. I think, again, there's so much, and unfortunately, there are some policies in place that do not incentivize it. Right? Like, it's like if you leave it on the ground, then you can use insurance for it, right? Whereas if you pick it up, then you can't. So I think that, again, it's a circular thing, right? We have to, fix it along all the points, and also, we know that a lot of this is, people don't necessarily know, where to send it, where to put it, like how to connect people. So it is really about creating these networks. And the more we talk about it, the easier, hopefully, it will become.
I was wondering, just because like you had mentioned before, kind of like, you want to feed humans and feed animals and feed the soil, and I feel like kind of we've like siloed humans, out of the like natural world, and we're like talking about the circular economy like within like human, like, from a human perspective. And I'm wondering if like we really need to like expand that circle to include like animals and soil like kind of on the same level, because like I've read that soil erosion is one of like it's huge. Not enough people actually understand what a big deal it is, and that's probably what has to do with like all our foods not being as nutritious as they used to be. But also, like, if soil dies completely, which like it looks like it's on its way to doing, like so much depends on that. Like, we can't survive separate from it. We won't be able to grow anything. Like, everything will die after like the microorganisms in soil die.
That's not well understood, though, and it's actually a very difficult story to tell an average consumer as well. You're absolutely right. Of course, you're absolutely right. So circular economy does mean elevating them all to the same level, for sure.
Yeah.
But it isn't well understood. It's also, frankly, not the sexiest thing to talk about, right? When you're talking about food system transformation, when you start talking about soil quality and erosion and lack of nutrient density, you can see people going like this. But actually, it's probably it's the foundation. So it's actually probably the most critical part to talk about, because beyond the nutrient density, you are also impacting soil-based microorganisms, which then has an impact on your microbiome, which then has an impact on gut health, which then has an impact on whether or not you develop type 2 diabetes, and so on and so on. But there aren't that many people making that circularity link. Well, there are some, but we're in a small group.
Yeah. So I guess to get to like the point of my question, I was like, since you guys are out there working so hard anyways, trying to educate people with your products, like maybe, like, how do you feel about reframing it to try to like maybe flip it and be like, hey, we're not just on the top, always, and we need a balance.
I think your point is really important too, because I mean, at the end of the day, we don't want to have to grow more food resources to feed a growing population. Like, we want to maximize the value of food resources that are already in circulation to make sure that, we're feeding people nutritious foods without having to use more land, use more fertilizer, use more farm label, like clear forests for food. But and at the end of the day, like the human population is growing, the need for food resources is growing. That's where Upcycled, I think, can really play a piece in maximizing the value of otherwise lost nutrition. But that being said, there's so many places, like when you actually look at where food's going to waste, farm level waste and food manufacturing, where we kind of focus in the value chain, are really the smaller. I think it's like 15% of food that's wasted comes from value added processing. So the value that we're capturing doesn't even really speak to the volumes of what's actually being wasted in consumer homes, for example.
37% is wasted at home.
Yeah.
So
some good news though on that. I think Organics LA, the program, so now the green bins, residents and businesses are to be separating their waste, and that just has come through. So we didn't get deep into composting and these other layers of regenerative ag today, but yeah, Organics LA, that's a big win. And
he beat me to it. But literally, I think like using our platforms to also educate people about policies that are in place where we can increase the organic material going back into feeding soils. Yep. And yeah, that means, I think every LA resident now technically can put their food scraps in the green bin. I know we don't necessarily have on the back end all of the system set up, but technically, I think all consumers can do that. So
yeah, and if you take a photo of composting at home and upload it to our cultivatefood.org rewards ecosystem, you get points. You could win some cool stuff.
Oh my god!
What can I do with the points, Erik? Do tell.
We have Sweet Green gift cards, a Heart House milkshake party, dinner for 8 to 10 at Plant Food and Wine with celebrity chef. We got some cool stuff on there.
Okay.
I will also say on that note, makesoil.org is a great organization if you want to find local composting operations if you're not in LA County. So there's just so many.
But I think back to the original question. Sorry, we got carried away there, didn't we? I think that we have to take consumers with us on this journey, and they are not there yet. And we are there, and we are all responsible for this, but in food system and food system transformation, there have been lots of mixed messages, even in other systems, even in fashion. H&M have just been sued recently because their sustainability claims were not, they had no data to say that their sustainable clothing was made differently to their average clothing. So it's happening in all categories. And in particular in food, there's been a lot of greenwashing. And so if you want to tell the truth, it's quite hard to tell the truth and stand for that and be differentiated. And we, above all else, we have to take the consumer with us. So if you start to talk to them about Upcycled and soil health and it's quite a lot for an average consumer to take in when they're buying a bag of chips. Or I don't mean to downplay this, but but when I'm making a decision to buy a bag of chips, I don't necessarily I've only got a few seconds to read all the messages, and there are certain ones that will jump out and others that won't. And I think that soil health will come, but at the moment we're at, it's probably too large and too untangible a message to get through to those, not to you guys, obviously, because you're incredibly well educated when it comes to sustainable systems, but the average consumer, I think it's a lot. So,
last thing, I will say we are all very lucky because we do work in food, right? And the one thing we all have in common is that we all eat. So food is a very powerful tool to include consumers on those sustainability journeys. So I feel very lucky that I get to talk about and to get people involved through this avenue.
By the way, because I worked in food was the only reason they allowed me into the US, because I moved here during COVID and Donald Trump was president. So I had to make a case that I was absolutely critical to the food supply chain that I work here. Just as an aside.
There you go. Great. We're happy to have you.
Okay. Hello. So I actually think I may be the youngest person here because I'm a freshman at UCLA and I just turned 19. And this question is mostly...
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So this question is mostly targeted to both you, Laura, and Kate, specifically about how I've noticed the conversation tends to be about produce and processed foods, but we haven't talked a lot about meat. For example, big agriculture companies like Monsanto, also the meat industry, Cargill, Tyson's. And I'm not sure if either of you have been interested in exploring that space too, because I know that certain meat alternatives like Impossible Meat, Beyond Meat, consume just as much water, and currently lab-grown meat has become a thing, but I don't think people want to pay $65 a pound.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit all the issues in one statement, right? Well done. I think in our company we focus much more in the space that Monsanto and Cargill and Tyson operate, and I will say that they are just starting to look at how to leverage upcycling in their businesses now. I think they're a little, I mean, Cargill and Tyson and Monsanto aren't members of the Upcycled Food Association yet.
But Tyson is having a Upcycled Innovation Challenge, I believe, next month. So
yes, but we'll see how that goes.
I'm optimistic.
We'll see how that goes. I would say these are what you've picked, the three biggest like oil tankers of businesses when it comes to food ingredients, and so for them to change direction is going to take a lot of effort, a lot of resources, time and money. I think they understand that upcycling is the right thing to do, and it is happening and it will happen. And what they're trying to do is they're testing the water. The Innovation Day is them testing the water. And the Innovation Day, for me, having worked in big companies, this is a low-risk way to understand whether or not Tyson can invest further in upcycling. So to your point, they're just at the beginning of their journey. And actually, to be really honest with you, it's one of the reasons why I moved from a big corporation to a startup with 5 people. I'm employee number 5. So it's a big jump for me personally. But if I really want to do something meaningful and I actually want to do something truly disruptive and innovative, it's happening in the smaller companies. Right, and the decision making is faster, and the activity is faster, and so on. But I think you're right to call them out, because I think they need to play catch up.
If you're looking for an internship and want to write a white paper on that this summer.
Oh, you see, it was worth coming.
It's a good topic.
All right. Well, that's it for us.
No more questions.
No, we're
Oh,
cut
damn.
off. They're giving me the light.
Listen,
They're giving me
there's
the light.
one more thing that's given me real anxiety over the last hour and a bit, right? Today is Stop Food Waste Day, and I've just been thinking about all the food left outside that isn't being eaten. So please, will somebody tell me what's please either take it home or do something with it, because that's giving me, I've been thinking about it for the last hour or so.
We'll be up here if you have any more questions. Thank you so much to these incredible panelists.
Thank you.
And thanks for having us.